If Arch Manning wins in the SEC, what will his legacy be?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. John Garcia Jr., your favorite recruiting analyst, joining the show today. John, I don't believe we have talked since it was announced that Texas and Oklahoma will be going to the SEC a year early in 2024. So my first question for you is, what does this move mean on the field? This is a two-part question, but the first part, what does this move mean on the field for the Texas Longhorns going to the SEC in 2024?
It's high risk, high reward in my eyes. This is a step up in obviously competition, the depth of the league, I think. And obviously if you hit it the right way, your ceiling increases. But if you don't, your floor probably drops simultaneously. So it's really fascinating to look at the potential of all of these conference realignments and what they could mean. But for Texas, yeah, it feels like a bit of a tipping point in my mind. Either you hit the ground running and you become right off the bat a strong program in the strongest conference, or the floor can just fall out from beneath you at this juncture. So it's going to be really critical every day, it feels like, with Texas here going forward. But yeah, your ceiling theoretically rises, which is saying a lot, right? Because this is a program that branding wise is up there with everybody else, and recruiting wise is hitting the right notes every single cycle to accumulate as much talent as possible. But obviously the on-field product has to start to match that, or changes will be made. And that's not a good sign when you shift conferences in between all of that. But that's looking at it from a pessimistic standpoint. Looking at it the other way, this could literally take Texas to new heights. And that's something that, with that brand, is kind of scary for everybody else to think about. If there's a sleeping giant in any of these conference realignment scenarios, you'd be hard pressed to identify a program that's in a position compared to Texas that has a better shot to take a massive step forward.
Okay. In terms of recruiting, what does this mean for Texas as far as recruiting? Because I've said they're already recruiting at a top 3, top 5 in the country level. If anything, this gives them more of a recruiting footprint. Now you can go into Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, and sell to these kids. If you stay here for 4 years, you can play in your home state, even if you come to the University of Texas. So aside from that, or expand on that, what does it mean for recruiting University of Texas going to the SEC in 2024?
Yeah, under Sark, we've seen Texas push a little bit more national every single cycle, a little bit more national every cycle. And I think that continues with this move to the SEC. We've seen consistency in the immediate neighboring states, particularly Louisiana. I mean, my gosh, Arch Manning, hello, Derek Williams. I mean, just a great haul in the Bayou. I think that can now stretch. But you've gone into Georgia. You've certainly gone into Florida already. So I think this will all enhance some of those national recruiting battles, because now, like you said, you can sell seeing your son or your friend or whoever is in the circle play without having to travel all the way to Austin, or having to travel, pretty far from home. Now you're within driving distance in a state like Florida, where you're going to be able to go see the Horns theoretically play, at Florida or close thereafter on a consistent basis, which is kind of what we're hearing at this point. So yeah, it really does change when you can sell something that is tangibly coming down the pike. It's not just, hey, if all of these things align, you can watch me play this game. It's a lot more easy logistically to plan out, maybe when you're going to go see, somebody, play ball. And that's important. I can't tell you how many kids, JD, have told me in Florida, hey, I just got this Oregon offer. I just got this USC offer. I just got this Ohio State offer. But, man, I don't know, because it's so far, another conference, not sure, how much I can be seen. And that really does matter. It varies between recruits, but for the bulk of them, it really does matter. So I do think something like that that's tangible will be a huge benefit to both Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah, so we know that the Manning family legacy started in the SEC, right? Whether it was, with Archie and Eli at Ole Miss, or Peyton at Tennessee, and now how fitting. As soon as Arch, comes out of high school and gets ready to go to college, Texas is now moving to the SEC. We know, like you said, Texas is on that verge of getting ready to make a big jump, right? If they can just get the on-field production to match everything else, we're looking at, as you said, a sleeping giant. If Arch comes in and say he's the starter next year for the next 2 years, however, and he wins at Texas in the SEC, what will his legacy be long term?
It's got the same deal, high risk, high reward. It's got a higher ceiling than that of his uncles or his grandfather, because as great as they were, there was not, but besides the 1 year for Peyton, there was not national title implications for these guys. It was a lot of conference titles, and obviously all the individual and passing accolades that anybody could ask for. But if you can get to the mountaintop in this SEC, it's going to hit different regardless of player or school, because it's literally bigger and badder than it's ever been, and everybody already recognizes it as the top conference. This just solidifies that. So if you navigate the early SEC schedule that successfully, my goodness, you've not only lived up to the hype on a LeBron-like level, which we've really never seen before in football, but now you've exceeded, at least at this stage, you've exceeded multiple Hall of Famers at the collegiate and NFL level, which is crazy to say out loud. But yeah, if Texas is even in the discussion and makes one playoff, it feels like you have already, within the sport and within your team, exceeded what Peyton, Eli, and Archie did at their respective programs in their conference, no less. So the first, Arch Manning start against Ole Miss or Tennessee will be fascinating. All the stuff we just saw with the Kelsey brothers and their family in the Super Bowl will be magnified times 10 with the entire Manning family. What colors are they wearing? What side are they sitting on? All that fun stuff. So yeah, it would mean that much more. So I do think that, again, the ceiling is as high as it's been, but if it's a flop, again, it's as glaring and magnified as a flop as we'll ever see, at least up until this point. So it really is a slippery slope in either direction.
Yeah, if the SEC doesn't get Arch playing at Rocky Top, then they don't know what they're doing. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question to that. Even with college football moving to the 12-team playoff, you still think if Arch leads Texas to that playoff, that solidifies him as the Texas quarterback and living up to the expectations coming out of high school?
Yeah, I should have clarified that. That's a great follow-up, because my brain is on the 4-team format, meaning you're one game away at worst from a national title appearance. But yeah, if we get to the semifinals with Arch at Texas, yeah, now all of a sudden it does feel like you have exceeded a lot of expectation, because folks don't remember that while Peyton had the borderline Heisman season, it was the next year after he left that Tennessee ended up winning it all under T. Martin. So yeah, that's really tangibly it's really the only thing you could do besides winning the Heisman that your family hadn't done. So I do think either of those two feats would certainly help to accomplish that, at least at the collegiate level. But obviously, again, in that family, it goes well into your 30s from a legacy perspective. But they'll tell you as much as anybody. I mean, SEC football it's in them. It is really in them. So in that way, it's actually fitting that, for Arch's his second season and beyond, it'll be SEC for good for Texas.
Yeah, so coming out of high school, Quinn Ewers was the number one recruit in the country. There's a stigma around him because he forgoes his senior year of high school, takes $1 million, whatever it was, goes to Ohio State. That doesn't work out, right? And so he comes to the University of Texas with a lot of pressure on him. And then Arch Manning, you talked about the Zion Williamson, LeBron level hype since he's been in middle school. So obviously when he starts, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him as well. I'm going to ask you, who do you think had more pressure on them coming into the University of Texas? Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning?
That's a great question. Like you said, a pair of number ones. It's probably Arch, especially because Quinn took such an unconventional path to Texas, right? Committed, decommitted, flips to Ohio State, skips a year of high school. There was so much abruptness in his timeline and shifting in that timeline that I think it took away a little bit from the talent and the arm and the expectation. But with Arch, man, it's on 10 from middle school, like you said. Really something we've never seen from a football perspective. Arch Manning has the most basketball recruitment we've ever seen, right? It is, every step of it, every inch of it, every opinion around it was covered. And Quinn didn't have that coming in. But now I think you could argue that he's got as much pressure as any quarterback in the country, more pressure than Caleb Williams to follow up the Heisman season, more pressure than whoever's going to be the starter at Georgia to try to go for a three-peat, ditto for Alabama to try to get them back in. I think he's got the most pressure, and it starts now. Like you've got to do it in the spring. So I think Arch has more career pressure, but right now Quinn Ewers has the most pressure of any quarterback in the country to get it right in March and April, ahead of having to do so once again through fall camp and once again when the season actually begins in August or September.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We're going to talk about what's at stake for Quinn Ewers next season after a quick word from FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes made. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, John, you just made a really interesting point that going into this season, no player in college football, especially at the quarterback position, might have more pressure on them right now than Quinn Ewers does, right? Based on what we saw last year and who's currently number 3 on the depth chart.
Yeah,
I think it's a very, I think there's a very interesting situation this year for Quinn Ewers because you've talked so much on this episode about ceiling and floor. So let me give you my ceiling and floor for Quinn Ewers this year. I think if he goes out and has a really, really good year, you're possibly talking about a first-round NFL draft pick.
Correct.
If he doesn't have a good year, has the same type of year he has last year, we're talking about Quinn Ewers possibly entering the transfer portal. Like the distance between ceiling and floor for Quinn Ewers this year is astronomical. So I've kind of just talked about it, but in your opinion, what's at stake for Quinn Ewers in the 2023 season?
It's all of those things. That's a great way to frame it, Jay. It's all or nothing here. And I think what aligns so well with that is Sarkisian. I mean, it's not as drastic for him. It's not, hey, figure it out, or your replacement is sitting right here that everybody kind of unanimously loves right now. It's not that clear, but there's probably a number, right? There's got to be a number out there somewhere. So yeah, it goes hand in hand. And that element to me is very good for Quinn Ewers because those two have kind of got to figure it out together. Unless Sark pivots to Arch Manning or Maalik Murphy or whoever, and now it's a gamble. Hey, does this give me an extra year, or does this cut me off right now, kind of deal? So I think Quinn kind of has to do it this year. I think he knows that. He should welcome it because, like you said, on the plus side of Quinn Ewers, you're talking about one of the strongest arms in the country. On a big physical frame that, has actually held up pretty good after that early season situation. So I do think there's so much to like there. And obviously, if he responds to this pressure with production and increased production from 2022, you talk about something scouts will drool over. It will be that. Holding off the young gun gives you cachet. I mean, they're still talking about Jalen Hurts holding off of Tua from Tua's freshman season with a whole lot less hype than Arch Manning. Obviously, his story's a little bit more layered, but he still gets credit for that. So imagine the credit Quinn Ewers would get for holding off on Arch Manning and increasing his production and holding on to that job. I do think the timing is perfect for Quinn to take this next step. There's less to learn from Quinn's perspective. I remember this time last year, I started with Locked On last spring. It was like Quinn Ewers, savior, all this stuff, but you got to get here. You got to learn the system. You got to get through practice. You got to do all these things. At least those elements are behind him. So now it's all mental, right? It's purely mental for Quinn. It's really never been physical for him, but now the lack of experience can't be thrown out there. His age, his youth, all the transition, all those elements that were kind of natural inhibitors from a human standpoint, they're all out the window. It's about ball and the mental for Quinn Ewers right out of the gate. And he's got Arch there every day. And Maalik Murphy, by the way, who was a blue chip recruit on his own there as well, to remind him every single step of that way. So it is really boom or bust in every sense of the phrase at this point for Quinn Ewers. I get the sense he's going to rise up to it. He's very much covering him in high school, very much an internalized motivational kind of guy. You're not going to see him tweet about it or rally up the team, in a certain way. You might see like a Drew Brees or somebody else, but he internalizes that thing. So he'll put as much pressure on himself as the world will put on him. So it's his time to answer that call at this point. A lot to ask a 20-year-old or however old Quinn is, but that's the situation that, Texas and that position has built up to be. So it's time to put up or shut up, unfortunately for him.
Yeah, and I've said Arch Manning being there, of course, it puts pressure on him because, the moment you start making mistakes, people are going to call for Arch. But on that same token, at least right now, it takes some pressure off of him because, like you said, while they're covering Arch Manning like an NBA star, the former NBA star and Quinn Ewers theoretically can just focus on football for probably the first time in his life. Speaking of Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers, if Arch Manning and Quinn both live up to or exceed the hype under Steve Sarkisian, does Texas become the premier landing spot for quarterback recruits, similar to wide receiver recruits in Ohio State right now?
Yeah. How could it not, right? I mean, Sark brought a lot of that already when he got to Texas, with we mentioned Jalen Hurts in Alabama. At Alabama, he earned so much of that with how he navigated and brought along multiple quarterbacks. So if he does it at Texas with those two guys, my goodness, yeah, I think it will be right up there with Lincoln Riley, who probably has that post right now as, hey, if you're the number one quarterback, you should probably take a visit or at least make a phone call. I do think Texas will become that, and we're seeing that perception shift. It's not what it was 10 years ago in the sport. One, because of the portal and how many quarterbacks have had success at either multiple places or late in the game at a place as they're a little bit older. But the coaching carousel has also pulled away from some of the no doubter, hey, this guy's going to get the number one quarterback every year. But if it ever shifts back to that, Texas will be one of the first few in line to benefit from it, especially with Arch. I think it's almost singular to Arch, but obviously Quinn has to be good for Sark to theoretically get there to be able to develop Arch. But if Arch hits, it's one of those things, all the things I said about Texas and then some for Arch himself, because now all of a sudden you have dealt with, in this day and age, the most hyped football recruit of all time, and it worked out. It's something that would unfortunately be an upset, right? Because we're like cynical in nature nowadays. We're like, there's no way he can live up to this, right? I said that about LeBron a long time ago, and he's been the one to do it the most. If Arch does it in football at that position in this social media age, it will be pandemonium, and Sarkisian will reap those benefits for the rest of his coaching career, whether it's at Texas or wherever else he ends up, because that's something that we just haven't seen it. How many, conversely, you see the opposite, right? You see number one quarterbacks go and bust in college football more than you see them succeed. It's changing recently. Your Trevor Lawrences, your Justin Fields, your Caleb Williamses have all lived up to that number one hype very well. But before that, it wasn't the case. So if it works with Arch, I think this thing will hit a level that none of us are really ready for in this day and age of hype and trends and momentum. So it'll be fun to see how close they can get to that.
Yeah, if Arch meets or exceeds expectations, it's going to be a lot of freezing cold takes, as the kids would say. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. John Garcia Jr. joining us once again. Hook 'em. Peace.